Hello everyone, my name is Dinesh from Consultech and welcome to our first video. Today we are going to showcase in real time how you can proactively and efficiently manage security in an AWS enterprise setting by using our Security Hub Auto Remediation Response solution. It does have a long name to it, so throughout the video we will be calling it SHARR. We built our SHARR solution by taking inspiration from the implementation found in the AWS Solutions library. Please navigate to their solutions page and view the implementation guide for more information. Before we go through the actual demo, we want to quickly walk through the overall design and setup instructions, which is published on our company website. As you can see on the screen, the URL is consultech.com.au/AWS/AWS Security Hub Auto Remediation Response, all separated by hyphens. Feel free to browse this page and read it on your own time. The AWS SHARR solution is built around Security Hub. And for those who don't know what Security Hub is, it's a free service that gives you a comprehensive view of the entire security posture in AWS. It basically checks your environments against security standards and best practices. How it does that is by evaluating AWS accounts and resources against pre-packaged security standards such as SIS AWS Benchmark, PCI DSS, AWS Foundational Best Practices, etc. It also has third-party partner integrations, which enables you to send data or findings from third-party products and or services to AWS Security Hub, which I think is a very handy feature to have. We have provided links to official AWS documentation for all relevant AWS services used within this solution. So click on the links and have a read through it if you want to understand more about these services in detail. Now let's talk about the overall design architecture and its key components. As shown in the diagram, we have two organization accounts, but one account is designated as the Security Administrator account for the AWS organization. The Security Admin account is chosen as the delegated administrator for the Security Hub service, and all other organization accounts are joined as members to this admin account. What this typically does is that it sends findings created from any AWS account to the Security Admin account, which consequently generates a CloudWatch event in the Security Admin account. There are two CloudWatch event rules created per Security Hub control, and one of these rules will be triggered automatically via the CloudWatch event generated by the findings mentioned earlier. The other CloudWatch event rule can be triggered on demand by invoking a Security Hub custom action. These rules then invoke a Lambda function which has all of the remediation logic and supported libraries. The Lambda function uses IAM roles in target accounts to assume relevant permissions and remediate the non-compliant resource. Finally, a notification is sent to the end user, which in this case can be either a CloudOps team or a security team. We have included an AWS Systems Manager automation in the diagram, but almost every remediation in our solution only uses Lambda functions. This is one key difference which separates the implementation found in AWS Solutions library. Next up is the setup process. Please note that we won't be demoing the setup process as it takes up a lot of time, and for the purpose of this video, we will be going through each implementation step and explaining it as best as we can. As mentioned before, the SHARR solution is based around Security Hub. Therefore, we need to set up AWS Security Hub prior to implementing the SHARR solution. On a very high level, we have given 5 steps in implementing Security Hub in an AWS organization. Step number 1 is to enable Security Hub service in all AWS accounts and all AWS regions. Remember, Security Hub is a regional service, so we want to ensure all regions are covered as part of the security assessment. Step number 2 is to designate a dedicated security account as the delegated administrator for AWS Security Hub service in each AWS region. Step number 3 is to then enable member accounts from the delegated administrator account in each corresponding AWS region. Member accounts can be automatically enabled if required, or they can be invited if they're not part of the organization or external. Once you have completed steps 1 to 3, you will have an implementation similar to what's shown in the diagram above, but they are only relevant or catered to each AWS region. What this means is that any Security Hub member that generates and forwards its findings to the security admin account, it will do so for its own AWS region. So ideally, we would want to aggregate those findings into one particular region. This is where we implement step number 4, which is to enable Security Hub cross-region aggregation, which is typically done in your home AWS region. Finally, we disable Security Hub controls depending on the overall enterprise architecture. If you click on the link given here, it will take you to a link or a page where AWS gives recommendations on what Security Hub controls that you might want to disable. For an example, there are IAM controls that are global, so that should be only enabled in your home AWS region. And for CloudTrail logging, they recommend enabling this control only in the region and the account where you log and store your CloudTrail log files. As mentioned before, the steps we have listed are very high level, and we do recommend you to follow the official AWS documentation for in-depth guidance on implementation steps for setting up AWS Security Hub. Finally, we get to the setup process of the SHARR solution itself. Please note that all SHARR components are provisioned and configured in the aggregated region of the delegated administrator account. The implementation steps given below are very technical and only include remediation for Security Hub Control ID EC 2.2. The first 2 steps are basically creating shared resources, which will be used by all the remediations for any Security Hub Control ID. Step number 1 is creating the KMS key to encrypt SHARR data at rest and in transit, where step number 2 is to create an SNS topic where we send SHARR notifications. Step number 3 is to create a Lambda function for remediating any non-compliant resource for EC 2.2 control. The CloudFormation template has 3 resources where you have an IAM role, which is used by the Lambda function, and a log group where you store all Lambda logs and the Lambda function itself. The contents of the Lambda function code base and its supported libraries are not covered in this blog post, but we will try to briefly cover them during the demo session a bit later on. Step number 4 is to create a custom action, which is used to enable on-demand remediation of resources. Since there is no CloudFormation support for creating Security Hub custom actions, we have given the corresponding AWS CLI command. One key thing to note here is the ID that's been used when creating the custom action. In this case, it's named EC22. This value is then fed into the next step, which is to create the CloudWatch event rules, where we create one event rule which is triggered via the Security Hub custom action. As you can see, the custom action ID needs to match what you have entered in step number 4. The other event rule will be automatically triggered by the findings generated from any member account. Finally, we have 2 Lambda permission resources, which grants the CloudWatch event rules permissions to invoke the Lambda function created in step number 3. Step number 6, we create IAM roles, and the key thing to note here is that these resources are created in all member accounts, because the Lambda function will assume all IAM roles, which is created by this template, to gain relevant permissions and remediate the corresponding non-compliant AWS resource. Now we finally arrive at the live demo, which is the most interesting part of this video. First, let's go through the scenario which we are going to showcase. Typically in an AWS organization, we have a number of AWS accounts to manage. However, even though our SHARR solution can manage any number of AWS accounts, in this demo, we are only using 2 organization member accounts. For reference purposes, organization account A is named Consultech Shared Services Prod, all separated by hyphens. Account B is named Consultech Core Network, all separated by hyphens. And the security admin account is named Consultech Core Security, all separated by hyphens. The 2 resources which we will be remediating in our demo are security groups and S3 buckets. And this is because we found the most common attack vector hackers use to gain access to systems is by exploiting open S3 buckets and security groups. Now, if you remember in the design and setup phase, we configure remediations per security control, or in some cases, we might group certain security controls into one. For example, all S3 controls are remediated using one set of CloudWatch event rules and a corresponding Lambda function. Similarly, security control EC 2.13 and 14 are grouped into one since they pretty much have the same logic, with the only difference being the TCP port. The blue arrow shows the security controls which are configured to automatically remediate, whereas the yellow arrow shows the remediation can be only done by invoking a Security Hub custom action. Now you might wonder, why do we need a Security Hub custom action to remediate on demand? This is to cater a scenario, let's say you have some AWS accounts, for example, they can be sandbox or playpen accounts, that require open rules for testing purposes or during the development phase. In this case, we don't want to disrupt the app developers, but we can continue to monitor these resources and remediate on demand if required. Now that we are done explaining the scenario, let's get to the demo itself to showcase proactive remediations happening in real time. There's one small thing to note before we get started, is that you will see some information being masked on the screen. This is for security purposes, as we don't want to share any sensitive data, even though this is a demo environment. We will first create resources in organization account A, which is the shared services account. First up is the S3 bucket, which will simulate service security control S3.8. And then we will modify the default security group to simulate EC 2.2. And then we will create a new security group and add in a rule to simulate EC 2.13. Since EC 2.13 and 2.14 are very similar in terms of logic, we will only create one rule there, and we will create the other rule to simulate EC 2.14 in the organization account B. Right, let's jump into the shared services account and start creating these resources. As you can see, we have signed on to the AWS single sign-on portal. And if we click on these accounts, we have 6 AWS accounts, and what we really want is the shared services account. And we will select Power User Permission to sign into the AWS console. Once we come to the console homepage, let's navigate to the VPC console. Right. Now we should be going to the security group subsection, where we can create the resources to simulate those service controls. Now this account has 2 VPCs. As you know, when you create a VPC, it comes with a default security group. So in this case, we're just going to modify one of these default security groups. Let's pick the first one and add either an inbound rule or an outbound rule. Let's add an inbound. Let's say HTTP, and just give a random CIDR. So the Google DNS, and Actually, why not? We'll just say, since it's Google DNS, we'll just put DNS here. Right. Now what this should do is that the Security Hub member in this account should pick up a finding for this particular service control, and it should forward that control to the security admin account where a CloudWatch event will be generated. As a consequence of that, it will then trigger the CloudWatch event rules, which will then invoke the Lambda functions and then assume a role in this account to remediate this resource. We will also create another security group to simulate the other service control, which is, the security control, which is EC 2.13. We'll call this ConsultTech demo, SHARR demo shared services, demo SHARR shared services. There are two VPCs as mentioned before. We can pick either one, doesn't matter. So what we want to simulate is the 2.13, which is if someone adds a rule for SSH that is open to the internet, or open to everywhere basically, and we go ahead and create it. Right, now we have a configuration set in the SHARR solution where it won't actually remove this rule completely. Instead, what it will do is it'll remove this rule, but it'll add another rule for the same TCP port, but instead of the source being anywhere, it'll add the CIDR range of the VPC. Now this is because if there's any scenario where there are applications within this VPC that needs to talk to each other via SSH for whatever reason, we want to ensure that the connectivity is not disrupted, or potentially we don't want to cause any downtime of services. Right. We will also now go to the S3 console to create an S3 bucket to simulate the service control of S3.8. Okay, so ConsultTech demo SHARR shared services. So S3.8 ensures that your public access setting is enabled. What we want to do is we want to disable that. We want to acknowledge it, and we can create it. Right, so now if you click on that bucket, and if you go into the permissions, we can see the public access is off. If we go back to our diagram, we can now see that we have created the resources in the shared services account to simulate all of these service control. What we should now see is the SHARR solution picking up these findings and automatically remediating all of these resources, because that's the configuration we have set in the scenario. Let's go ahead and check our mailbox. Right, so this is our notifications folder, and all the SHARR notifications or event notifications should be coming in here. Since the folder is empty, let's just do a quick sync up. There we go. So as we can already see, there are two remediation status messages that's generated from the SHARR solution. What you might be wondering is, what are these other notifications? Now, these are notifications that we have configured as part of the AWS Foundations implementation, just to notify if there are any changes made to security groups or S3 buckets. Now, we did that for the purpose of this demo to showcase that when you make a change, that you will get notified of what changes are being made. For an example, if you click on the first notification message, we can see the event has come from the shared services prod account. And if we scroll down, you can see the event name is authorized security group ingress, and the port is UDP DNS, and that's the side range that we've added. Now, what should happen is these rules should be remediated, and the status messages should show that. Here we go. The first remediation status is showing that the ID EC2.2, which is the default security group, has been remediated. It gives you a summary of all the important information that you need at a glance. It's like the security group ID, the name, the AWS account ID, and the name. And also the security group finding ARN if you want to go and actually look at the finding itself in the Security Hub console. Now, as you can see, this message that's come afterwards should be the event that shows that it's being revoking those rules. So it's again from the same account, and if we scroll down, we can see the event name is now revoking security group ingress, and that's for the DNS port of that CIDR range. Right, so that completes the remediation for EC2.2. We will go back to the AWS console to verify that in a bit, but in the meantime, let's check out the other remediation messages. So here's the second one, which is for the EC2.13. That is to disallow unrestricted incoming SSH traffic. And the security group is the one that we created newly, and that's showing as resolved as well. Now, for whatever reason, if the remediation fails, the status will show failed here, and there will be another key value pair which shows the failed reason and the cause of failure. And let's look at the last remediation measure. That should be for the S3 bucket that we created. So as you can see is S3.8, and that's the name of the bucket, and it's showing as resolved as well. So all in all of these resources were automatically remediated. As you can see, it shows the invocation method here on the status message as well. And if we go back into the AWS console, all of those resources should be now resolved. Now we're back onto the S3 console. Now if you refresh this page, there we go. The block public access is now turned on. And if we now go into the VPC console, this is for the TCP rule that we've added for anywhere. As mentioned before, it will replace with the CIDR range of the VPC CIDR. So if you refresh this, now you can see the CIDR range has changed. Similarly, if you go back into the default VPC that we have here, if you scroll down, you can see there are no security group rules found. Now this concludes our demo for all the resources in the organization account A. As for organization account B, we will be showcasing a mix of automatic and on-demand remediations. The SHARR configuration setting for this account is to auto-remediate security control EC2.2 only, and the rest of the resources have to be remediated on demand by using Security Hub custom actions. As mentioned earlier, the SHARR auto-remediation setting of a particular security control for a given AWS account can be configured according to your organization's requirements. Now let's jump into the network account and start creating these resources. We've jumped back to the AWS single sign-on page, where we will log on to the management console of the networking account. Once we've landed to the console homepage, we need to navigate to the VPC console. From the VPC console, we need to go to the security groups section. Now in this account, we have only created one VPC, which means that you will only have one default VPC security group. As shown in the previous organization account, which was the shared services account, we created inbound rules to simulate the security control EC 2.2. So in this case, we will be creating some outbound rules. Let's add the first rule, say HTTP, to any CIDR range. And let's just also add another rule, say SNTP, to a custom IP address, say 1.1.1/32. Now, once we save these rules, as mentioned before, the Security Hub member in this account will pick up a finding generated for this security control, and it will forward it to the security administrator account. And as shown in our diagram, because we have set EC 2.2 to be automatically remediated for both accounts, it should go and revoke both of these rules. Now, it'll take a few seconds for that to happen. And while it's doing its job, let's just go and create a new security group to simulate the security control EC 2.14. Let's call this security group Consultech SHARR Demo Network Services, because the previous one we've called Shared Services. Let's give it a description of SHARR Demo Network Services. We only have one VPC, so let's just select that. Now, the Security Control 2.14 stipulates that there shouldn't be any unrestricted traffic enabled for RDP. So what we're going to do is add the RDP rule to be allowed from any CIDR range. And let's go ahead and create the security group. Now, what this will do is the same process for the EC 2.2 control. However, when it gets to the security administrator account, our SHARR solution is configured to not auto-remediate this security control. Therefore, the only way of remediating this is by going to the Security Hub console in the security admin account and invoking a custom action against this finding. Now, before we do that, let's just go ahead and create an S3 bucket as well. We've now come to the S3 console page, where we will click on creating an S3 bucket. Let's name this bucket Consultech SHARR Demo NS, which is the same as the name we created for the security group. And click Create Bucket. Once the bucket is created, let's jump into its permissions and check the bucket policy. Now, the security control S3.5 stipulates that the bucket policy should enforce SSL when accessing the bucket or the bucket objects. As you can see, when you create a new bucket, there is no bucket policy attached. Therefore, the only way to remediate this control is by adding a bucket policy after you create the S3 bucket, or in our case, what we will do is we will go to the Security Hub console on the security administrator account and invoke another custom action where it will go and add the relevant permissions to enforce SSL in the bucket policy. Now, before we go and invoke these custom actions, we want to quickly jump into the mailbox and check if we have received any notifications for the auto remediation that we invoked for EC 2.2 security control. We've come back to our notifications folder in our mailbox. You've noticed that we've cleaned up the previous messages so that we can easily differentiate any new incoming messages. Let's do a sync up. And as expected, we can see the auto remediation status message, which says the invocation method is automatic, again for EC 2.2, and it's the default security group and the ID is listed here. However, the difference is it's now coming from the networking account, and the status is now showing as resolved. Before jumping back to the AWS console to verify this, let's go to the security administrator account and invoke the custom actions to remediate the other two resources as well. We've opened up another tab for the AWS single sign-on page, and we will log in as the administrator for this security account and then navigate to the Security Hub console. Now you can view the controls in the Controls tab once you're in the Security Hub page, where it'll show you all the failed controls. However, sometimes these controls do not get updated in the page, so you have to manually go into the security control where you want to go. In a real world scenario, you wouldn't know which control will be failed, but in this case, since we are actually simulating S3.5 and EC 2.14, we can easily search for it and go and remediate it on demand. Actually, we can see S3.5 showing up here, so let's just click on that. And let's just wait till it loads. As you can see, it's showing up one resources that's coming up as failed, which is the S3 bucket Consultec SHARR demo network services from the networking account. So what we're going to do now is select that and hit actions, where we have created 4 custom actions. But what we want to select is S3, which will go ahead and remediate this security control. You will see that it's now has successfully sent findings to the Amazon Event Bridge, where it will capture the event and trigger the event rule for the Security Hub custom action. While that's happening, let's go and invoke the Security Hub custom action for the other security control, which is EC 2.14. Let's see if we can search this. So as you can see, it's not actually showing up in this controls page, which means that we'll have to go to one of the standards and so ID equals EC 2.14 and select that and click on the standard. Now it says it's updated 14 hours ago. However, if you go and see the actual compliance status for all the resources, it'll show that it's failed. So there's a delay when Security Hub updates its actual overall status. But in this case, as I mentioned before, we know that we've invoked this. So we're expecting to see a failed resource. Now, usually when auto remediation is enabled, it would have been automatically remediated instantly, as you saw with the previous account. But in this case, we have not enabled that. So we have to go and manually invoke the custom action. Let's invoke EC 2.13 and 2.14. Let's now jump back to our mailbox to see if we receive any remediation messages for the custom action remediations that we just triggered. There we go. You've got 2 remediation messages. Let's check the first one, which is for S3.5. And as you can see, the invocation method is via Security Hub custom action S3, which was the one that we selected. And the S3 bucket name is Consultec SHARR demo network services, and it's from the networking account. Similarly, if we go into the other remediation message, we can see the invocation method is again via Security Hub custom action. This time the name of the custom action is EC 2.13 to 2.14, which remediated the ID of EC 2.14, and that's the name of the security group which we created, and that's the ID in the networking account. Let's now jump back to the AWS console to verify if those resources have actually been remediated. We're now back on the AWS console for the networking account. As you can see, this is the bucket policy, which was how we left before. So we just have to refresh the page to see if the bucket policy has been applied. There we go. So there is a bucket policy applied that enforces SSL, which says that for the bucket and anything under the bucket, you need to be having secure transport enabled. If not, it denies it. Now, if you go back into the VPC console, you'll see this is the security group that we created for RDP. And it was the CIDR range from anywhere. Now, if you refresh this, it should give you the CIDR range of the VPC. And if you also go back into the security group console, where we look at the default security group, you'll see both of the outbound rules that we've added are now removed. Now, this concludes the remediation for organization account B. Overall, we have shown you how you can utilize our SHARR solution to remediate non-compliant resources in real time, proactively and efficiently in an AWS organization. Before we wrap up the video, we want to let you know that if you are interested in having this SHARR solution, along with other smart solutions implemented in your AWS environment, then please have a look at our AWS Foundations implementation by navigating to the URL consultech.com.au/AWS Foundations. Our AWS Foundations platform as a service offering is the perfect solution if you're looking to start your cloud journey into AWS, or if you're already in AWS and looking to re-platform, say, build a version 2.0. All enterprise solutions and designs implemented via AWS Foundations are approved by AWS Professional Services. What's even more great is that you can customize these solutions to tailor fit your organization requirements, and we usually take 1 day to build the entire platform. Please reach out to us if you want to know more information about our AWS Foundation service offering, which will give you a head start in your AWS journey. We hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for watching.